voice at home. Well, our view is that Wi-Fi should be the kind of last resort. And yes, it's great if you have poor coverage at home, and it happens to a lot of customers, which means that for them, perfect. Voice over Wi-Fi is a solution that means they don't need a femtocell, or they need not something else. But for all the others, it would be daft to push them on Wi-Fi, where probably the coverage of their Wi-Fi in their home is not that perfect, when they have a good cellular coverage, and voice is not the highest capacity strain on the network. We would be very happy to make this decision from a network perspective, but we can't. I mean, we don't have the tools today to do that.
Yeah, and I guess that also the user has some choice. I mean, they also choose, so, and they might not be making the right choice, just might want to use Wi-Fi for whatever reason, and that's not necessarily in your best interest. So, is there any questions from the audience? Okay. I can hardly see because there is the light pointing on my eyes, but I think there is a question over there. Is that right? No? Okay, sorry. But I wanted to ask you one question in terms of, looking at the future, looking at LTE Advanced, 5G, and all the work that is ongoing. What is that we should expect in terms from a sort of technology point of view, in terms of improving both the coexistence between Wi-Fi and cellular and to manage the interference? What are the tools that are becoming available that are going to be most promising in terms of dealing with these issues?
Well, I guess, to start with, I think before we hit 5G, I think the biggest change that we may have is around all the license discussion that could change things that we do for at least small cell and interference management, in the sense that there is first the question of using this Wi-Fi spectrum in addition to the cellular, and there you're in a very different situation for interference management. There's no interference between macro and a small cell, for example, if you use 5 gig. It's the interference with the other systems for using 5 gig. But for us, at least from an outdoor deployment, for example, we don't have the interference with the macro, which is a completely different prospect, which is interesting. And from all this coexistence and the discussion we had with voice over Wi-Fi, or how well you integrate Wi-Fi and cellular, I think today, if I take the situation today, they're not integrated. We do very little operator Wi-Fi. There's segmented world, even deployment. We've talked many times of having Wi-Fi and small cell combined in the enterprise. We never do. Yeah. We deploy wireless LAN and we deploy some femtocell, separated. I think what happens with your license is probably big enough to maybe reshuffle the way that things are being done, because if you deploy a cellular within the 5 gig, or if you do the around, if you do LWA, you say, okay, I connect the two, then maybe you're thinking the infrastructure in a different way, and yes, you're thinking combined from day one. And I think all of this will change the way we do, even from an operator perspective. I mean, if you want to use LWA more widely, then you probably need to make deals with Wi-Fi operators. Your cellular network, and you have a Wi-Fi operator, okay, you make a deal and you do LWA. All these things, I think, will take place in the next years, and before 5G, I would say. And this is the midterm. Then 5G, yes, is a completely different perspective again, and it reshuffles the way we do things. I think the virtualization part of it will probably be the biggest element that will change the way we have coexisting systems between, and hopefully we'll have some more clever tools to do the whole thing. But I think it will be mainly through virtualization and through the new spectrum also, millimeter waves, 60, 80 gig, or even microwaves, where the small cell will have a completely different tool to operate and would talk to interference in a very different way.
So there'll be the small cell infrastructure will be somewhat separate, and therefore you have much more flexibility in terms of the way you manage, in terms of capacity and things like that. If you have the sort of the higher band spectrum, which are not good for macro anyway.
I mean, at least it's not used in a macro. Yeah. It will be dedicated to small cell.
Yeah.
We're talking there will be a very different story there.
So the code channel is kind of a short-term solution, and then we'll move to better
I think another way that'll be interesting to track and see how it evolves is ANDSF and policy servers like PassPoint and NGH has that. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves to track the quality of the experience of a user and use policy to shift the user to another layer on the network. And it's not a way of doing interference management, but it's a kind of a one-off of that. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that evolves, to see how operators use that to improve quality of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, without going into a shameless plug on all the really cool things that we could do in this space, but the only thing I would say that's been really interesting to think about way sort of in the future is if you get to sort of this vision of effectively using unlicensed and licensed spectrum, you have this densified network, you have these different players, and it kind of touches on some of what Benoit was saying is these different relationships that could evolve, where all of a sudden sort of a service provider that has a large Wi-Fi footprint is an MVNO for a mobile network operator and not the other way around, which turns it to a situation where you have the network almost as a service. And you're using it as a way to provide sort of ad hoc capacity where it needs to be provided and through different maybe relationships than we envisage today.
So there will be like the Wi-Fi first or a Google Fi project in that line, or
potentially. I mean, but just kind of flip. But in those cases, though, I think those things will struggle over time because of what we were talking about. I mean, when you're not, just like Benoit said, when you don't own the network, you can't ensure a certain level of quality of experience. I don't care if it's cheap. If it doesn't work, I'm not paying for it. So the folks who do have that and have that ability to provide some reliable experience will generally win out, I think, over time from that perspective. So this might be a case where, we wouldn't even see it with Google. They're putting out more fiber, they're putting out more managed Wi-Fi. They're doing that, right? So but space like Scratch and Republic might struggle over time without having that ability to kind of manage that quality of experience.
I guess because the issue of control is actually very important in terms of managing traffic. If you don't have that control or that visibility, then
you can't avoid the interference. You can't avoid, and the thing with especially the way Wi-Fi is designed right now, the way it works is fine, and then terrible, right? It's not like a slow degradation. It's working great and then it's working terrible, and you have to have the visibility of that and be able to make changes and be able to kind of deal with that situation if you're going to provide a service that someone's going to give you money for. And it's just the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Any question from the audience? A question over here?
Yeah, one question regarding goals.
Okay, hold on 1 second. The mic is coming.
My question has to do with Google's objections to using the 5 gigahertz spectrum for LTE-U, and they were pretty vocal about it. And then I think those objections kind of got refuted, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Is there any legitimacy to their concerns? And I know they have vested interest in like their Wi-Fi, services and that sort of thing.
I can take a stab at that. So your question is basically LTE Wi-Fi coexistence and how that's going to play out. There's two sides to the camp. I think one camp is how can they coexist together, and how can LTE, when it's introduced, work and coexist good at or better than Wi-Fi exists today with itself. And that's one aspect. That's the main. I think that's if the industry can agree on that, I think that's the answer. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on that.
I try not to wade into the regulatory discussions, but but we're a private company, so I can kind of say what I want. I think whenever there's something, LTE in its form is going to have to change somewhat to play in that space, and I think what the regulatory environment's going to have to do, or the regulatory bodies are going to have to do, is just define what is fair play, basically, and the debate is actually now whether is the definition as it sits today for the use of that spectrum is I guess, rigorous enough to make sure that it doesn't end up being a big problem, and that the LTE, which is frankly designed to take advantage of the spectrum it's allocated and dominate it, how is that going to actually play nicely in the unlicensed space? But at the end of the day, you've got to have an ability to deal with the fact that it is unlicensed spectrum, whether it's LTE using it or other Wi-Fi equipment, and manage that regardless. So I think what we'll see is a measured movement towards acceptance of LTE technology in an unlicensed spectrum environment, but we'll probably see a little bit more debate and maybe rules of engagement defined over the next year or so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think it's time to have our lunch break. I would like to thank so much the panelists for sharing their thoughts with us today.